Hello and welcome back.
Thanks.
Episode 48.
Yeah.
Just cruising
Yeah.
along.
Yep. Absolutely. So let's start off with some good news. We had the first day of spring last week. That's
Nice.
good. We finally get some.
Does that mean
some-
all the weather's gonna be great now?
I hope so.
I mean, it
Keith?
feels a lot warmer out.
It,
Like, I
yeah,
don't,
it's
Yeah.
getting a lot better
Yeah.
even in Minnesota.
even when it says it's like 30 degrees out right now,
Yeah.
you
I mean-
like walk outside, it
Yeah.
feels a warmer 30.
Daylight
than-
savings, I think, helps
Mhm.
too when it extends
Yeah.
the.
Yeah.
at least with the mood and everything. I mean, there can be another snowstorm around the corner. We learned that in Minnesota, right? But
Mhm.
at
It's supposed to be
least-
maybe on Saturday.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Mhm.
Anyways, any fun garden project planned, Tyler, after finishing the basement?
Oh, basement's still a work in progress.
Mhm.
But I think we got to do like edging around our house,
Okay.
and and then put rocks and plants and stuff, and so we're gonna make
Tyler's got a
one-
new house. So
We're gonna make one area bigger, and then we're gonna build a sandbox for the boys.
Okay.
So
the project
our
does
gardening
not-
project
yeah.
Nice.
for this summer.
And Keith, your boat already in the water?
Funny you say that.
Yeah.
Ice went out on Saturday, so Saturday afternoon I put our dock in.
Did
Oh,
you
really?
First time ever. I had to get.
Was
kinda
there
beat my-
another accident?
No, but the water's so cold.
Aw.
So anytime you got to put your arms in the lift something
Yeah.
or something like that, I froze. I got most of the dock in. I haven't got
Mhm.
my lift stuff in yet. So, but
Mhm.
I figured I had to ice out. I had an open day. I'm going for it. So plus my neighbor always gets his in always way before I do. So I figured I'd beat him
But-
while he's out of town.
Where is your boat stored over the winter? Is it just like
Just in-
outside
Yeah,
in your
that-
yard?
we
or-
wrap it and keep it in there. We
Oh,
have
okay,
enough
okay.
space. Yeah, so that'll go in anytime now. Once I get the
And you need a crane to? I don't know how this works.
No.
I'm
Yes,
not-
yes.
I'm not-
It's on a
There's a-
trailer.
there's
Just give it a push. And then,
Yeah.
okay.
there's a landing area where you
Okay.
back your boat up into the
Mhm,
the
mhm.
water. So no, you don't need cranes for putting boats.
Look how
No
the
way.
Minnesotans look at me. It's like, you have no idea about boats? No.
when you're driving the road, you see the boats on a trailer.
Yeah.
That trailer basically you can back up into a
Oh,
lake.
right. And then it kind of
then
launches
then,
off
away,
of
then
there.
you launch
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Mhm.
How about you? Any plans for the spring or what's going on?
No, I tried to revive my my plant project on the balcony again. I mean, the balcony is as large as a bird bath, basically. So nothing too huge there, but I tried to I don't know, find my green thumb and kind of get some flowers going or whatever to kind of
It's a little early, isn't it, for that, isn't it? Or
It
no?
is, but I try to I don't know, to
I'm not much of like a plant guy. Like, how warm do you need it?
me neither, Tyler. Do not look at
Oh,
me. I have
ye-
no
I
experience.
know my
okay.
wife
I-
says you need make sure it doesn't go below freezing overnight anymore.
Yeah.
So
Got it.
you're probably a couple of weeks.
Right,
Because
it's
we're
a-
kind of dipping
little
down
bit
in
low,
the
yeah.
30s still.
But yeah, no expertise here. I just
Oh.
try to
I
find my
thought you
green thumb.
knew.
Oh no,
Oh,
I did
okay.
not. I do not. So basically, I go to the garden
Trial and error.
center and stay there and look at the plants and ask, "Who of you do you want to come with me home to die?" That's basically how it works.
Lisa will be out on the patio trying to plant her plants this
Ugh.
Saturday when it's snowing.
Snowing. It's like it's a little. Hold off, Lisa. Just wait another week or
I
two.
wait a little bit with
Yeah.
the garden center. Yeah. So let's jump into our topic then today. The first one, and I think it's fabulous. It sounds like a movie, like an action thriller. There was a huge insider ring, global spanning, kind of blowing up last couple of weeks. Or it's long on the investigation, but it went public
Yep.
the last couple of days. And it's not funny for disclosure, right? I mean, that's always like
Yeah.
a little
Be
bit
clear about that.
yeah, let's be clear about that. It's always concerning when something happens, and we will kind of talk a little bit more about the impacts for all of us when something like that happens. But I found it just so interesting because it really sounds like a movie, and I give you some keywords of this operation. And it was involved lunch at the Michelin-starred restaurant in Paris. This is where it all started. Then there was somewhere involved $100,000 of cash in a plastic bag in a Vienna coffee. You see how casually Austria is part of this
Yeah.
again?
Isn't that what
Anyways.
you stumble across all the time when
Yeah.
you're back at home? 100,000.
You're right. Stumble about some plastic bags of cash. Then burner phones, obviously, right? The basic kind of code words, multiple people across the globe involved. So it really sounds like a, I don't know,
Like a whodunit?
like a like
Mystery?
a mystery movie, like a spy mystery movie. Anyways, the damage was about $17 million.
I feel like that's a lot of work for $17 million.
I was thinking too when I was reading those articles. It seems like for
It doesn't seem
a few players that
yeah,
were
right.
involved in 17 million. I was expecting like hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
For
And they were flying all around the world and
with like this kind of operation.
Mhm.
It feels like you need to make a little bit more.
Yeah.
Must not have been a very good tip because
I mean, I don't know if they started with the 100K though. If that was the only kind of seed capital to this operation.
or is
I
that just
guess.
a payment for a tip or something?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, right.
Anyways, there were like 17 million across 15 deal targets.
Okay.
So some known companies. The companies allegedly not involved,
Yep.
but they were targeted. And yeah, I
Do you
mean,
know some of the names that were the companies that were involved? Or not the they weren't involved. Let's
they
make
weren't
that
involved.
clear
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
But the stocks that were
yeah,
getting
we gotta be
traded on.
careful with this one.
It's included Principa Biopharma, French Utilities Suez, and Tiffany and Co.
Oh, okay.
So the last
Tiffany,
one is
yeah.
pretty
Pretty
known.
big, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Because
anyways,
LVMH bought Tiffany, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
And that was that was their thing, like M&A targets and
Got it.
insider kind of trying to figure out.
You'd think you'd
people.
load up on some options on those things and
Yeah,
make
that
more
was
than
also
17
in,
million, but
yeah, that was
that's
involved.
just
Ever
me.
Maybe that
derivatives,
was the
kickback
rationale with that.
payments, and stuff was involved. I don't know. Maybe they were not good at that,
Yeah.
at executing. Anyways,
Yeah, that's a
Keith, and we talked about it, like a little bit, touched on it, how this is bad for all of us. So how do you think something like that, and there are more cases out there, right? I mean, something like that seems to blow up every couple of years. We hear,
yeah,
like, the
insider
big ones.
insider trading is obviously definitely a no-no, and it's
Mhm.
you know, we as investment professionals are taught to stay far away from that and not
Mhm.
even get close to a line because there's some gray areas, and obviously I think
Yeah.
what they were doing certainly wasn't probably
Yeah.
gray if they're handing out cash and
Mhm.
burner cells, stuff like that. But no, it just gives the industry kind of a bad look,
Reputation,
right?
yeah.
I think this stuff was going, and maybe it's still going on, but I think it was certainly more prevalent back, a decade or two
Mhm.
ago, right? I think there's a lot of where nowadays information is pretty much
Mhm.
instantaneous. You can get it out there
Yep.
quickly. I think back in the day when there was less news sources, I
Mhm.
think that was probably
Even more.
more of
Yep.
a common thing happening. I still don't think it was very common, but that's certainly, as a Joe average investor, you
Mhm.
want to be playing on a level field, and that's what
Right.
you want. Everyone disclosure, all the information at the same time. So I think anything like this that happens, obviously, I think this is, to Tyler's point, 17 million. It's
Yeah.
a pretty small
Yeah.
Mhm.
case, but you still.
I mean,
don't
when you
wanna-
start looking at some of the ones that you're probably thinking about a couple decades ago, like Cohen,
Yeah.
right? Like talking
Big
multi,
fish. Yeah.
like hundreds of millions.
hundreds of millions
Yeah.
and billions, right?
That's why the 17 million. I was like,
Yeah. But I think
for
that's
that kind
why
of operation.
Yeah.
I think that's why they go after that, also the smaller fish, just to kind of restore the trust in a financial system, which basically keeps us going, keeps the whole system up, is the trust that we have. And if that gets kind of
Eroded away. Yeah.
eroded away from things like this, kind of that is
Yeah,
really bad. And that's why the punishments are pretty high.
Yeah, and I think it's
They
great that
go to prison for a very, very long time when you do something like that. So, Tyler, do you think there is, because Keith touched on that with regulations and stuff, that years ago it was less regulations, even easier to make more money with insider trading? Do you think now, because we saw a whole lot of the big stories, right? And after every big thing that comes up, there's new regulations and new
Mhm.
ways to prevent that. Do you think it is enough yet? I mean, obviously not, because it's still working somehow. Do you think it's enough, or do you think regulations is more the small, targeting the small fish like us? We have to disclose everything we
Yeah.
trade and own. And do you think that the big fish still find ways to exploit that system despite all the regulations out there?
I mean, I'm sure there's enough regulations, and if I imagine the more you dive into different loopholes, I'm sure there are some, but I don't think more regulations will necessarily help.
Mhm.
But and I think no matter how much regulations you'll have, someone will
criminals are always out there.
Yeah,
Figuring it
there's
out,
always going to
yeah.
be a way around it. But to Key's point, I think the other part of it is more of a digital world now too
Mhm.
makes it challenging because they have
Even AI,
there's
you
a
can do
track
right
record
there.
of everything,
Mhm.
right? Whereas, a couple decades ago, obviously cell phones were still available, but it wasn't as prevalent, and the technology behind them wasn't as easy to
Sure.
track everything. So I think that's also part of it, is there's just a digital trail of everything that you do now.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I think it's easier, like if you with the new artificial intelligence AI, there's to all the digital stuff that's
Yeah.
out there now. There's probably programs that they can have that just absolutely
Yeah.
run. Look at this anomaly.
Yeah.
Why is this happening in this trade? I think I think that could probably get
Mhm.
pointed out a lot easier than years
Yeah.
past, where it's
Yeah.
more of a manual effort.
you see a large spike in volume on a specific option
Mhm.
for a company, or
Yeah.
specific volume on a general stock in general. I mean, there's just a lot more ways for them to
figure-
monitor it.
yeah.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, penalties are really high to being able to keep that lower and
Yeah.
kind of avoid that. But still, people are doing it. So, I mean, that's probably a little bit more diving into the psychological sector.
Yeah.
But why do you think, despite you going to jail probably for life for a very long time, why do you think still people are trying to do that? If
Money.
earlier or later it comes out normally, or I mean, we do not know what doesn't come out because we do not know about it. Is it like always greed, or is it pressure, or what kind of?
I think Tyler just summed it up in one word. It's money.
Yeah.
Greed.
It's
I mean,
greed,
I
right?
just leave
That's
it at
basically
that.
what
But
it
I think
is.
it's
So,
people. There's going to be bad elements of
Mhm.
every part of the society,
Mhm.
and there's probably a couple bad elements that are in
Yeah.
the financial service industry that are trying to
Yep.
cheat,
Yep.
and that's why the penalties are so high.
I mean, the interesting thing here that I found interesting. I mean, the damage was not too high though, but they did a very big effort to do it on a global basis. Not only to kind of diversify their bets they did, but also to kind of maybe get away from the prosecution, right? Because international
Laws are different, yeah.
right, laws are different, and maybe countries do not talk to each other. They go away with it, and that kind of shows, hey, the communication on an international way between the financial institutions, like the financial regulators, is obviously working at some point. So
Yeah, I think you have to be a director or a producer on a movie, Lisa, and get involved and
Yeah.
kind of
There
Yeah.
you go.
figure it out more.
I love stories like that, but I would love it even more if it would be fictional. Unfortunately, it's not. So, anyways, the life writes the best stories, right?
Mhm.
That shows it once again. But let's dive a little bit more into something with more meat on the bones for us to discuss.
All right.
The US companies are buying back their shares on a record number. 2022 was the spike, but when you see the chart here on a trajectory since 2026, it keeps going and the trend keeps upward. Why is that? What are some benefits? Tyler, I'll start with you. What do you think are some reasons that companies are buying back shares more than historically, and some benefits to the company and to investors?
Well, a lot of people look at, do they pay dividends, or do they pay or do they do buybacks, and what is that total shareholder yield? And with buybacks, the companies have a lot more flexibility,
Mhm.
right? If a company, let's say, has been paying a dividend for the last 20 years and they decide to cut it in
Mhm.
half,
Bad
the
news.
the stock is going to react pretty significantly to that news, because people are probably in that stock
For sure.
for the dividend. Whereas with buybacks, and I want to be careful with this, because like if Apple stopped doing buybacks, I think people are going to react negatively to that, to be
Mhm.
honest. So it's kind of like they're stuck doing it. But
Yeah.
generally speaking, a company doesn't have to do buybacks. And so it gives them a lot more flexibility, where if they are running low on
Mhm.
cash, they don't necessarily have to put that cash out there. Whereas with the dividend, it's like they have to do that dividend. And
Yep.
if they don't have the money, they probably have to take out debt or do something to keep it there. So I would say just part of it is it just gives them a lot more flexibility than what they would have in a dividend.
Yep, absolutely. And also, it's a tax advantage for the companies and for investors. Often increases their earnings per share, which kind of
Yeah.
can increase the stock price, right? Which is positive, or a positive signal, should signal
Yeah.
confidence in the company.
It's a capital allocation
Mhm.
decision, right?
Mhm.
Tyler mentioned you can do nothing.
Mhm.
You could reinvest your excess cash
Somewhere
back
else.
into the
Yeah.
company and grow it.
Yeah.
You can make a decision that you want to buy back
Yeah.
shares, and there's various reasons for it. Like
Mhm.
you said, you can think your stock's undervalued. That could send a
Mhm.
signal to the market saying, "I'm buying back our stock." we
Yep.
think the stock. I mean, so that's more a little different than
Yeah.
Apple, where
Mhm.
Apple's pretty consistent on it. So that's one reason. A lot of tech companies buy back
Mhm.
stocks because they're not. The other decision would be pay a dividend. Usually, if you're a faster growing company, that one's kind of off the table.
You
And
don't
it's
want to pigeonhole yourself. Yeah.
no, to Tyler's point, you don't want to do that. So then it's either buying back stock or just reinvesting in the company. A lot of tech companies to get young talent, and they issue shares to their new hires,
Mhm.
and so their outstanding float is
Yeah.
increasing.
Yeah.
So one way offsetting that is buying
Yeah.
back their shares as well,
So
right?
that is
So
not
it's like,
washed and
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
you don't keep on ballooning your share base. So
Yeah.
there's several reasons for it,
Yeah.
and it's there's some positive reasons. There's some other
Mhm.
people that argue that maybe not so positive, especially
Yeah.
if your management team's compensation is based on EPS
Mhm.
growth.
Yeah.
And if
Mhm.
you're really not growing it through the fundamentals of the company, but you're doing it by buying back shares,
Artificially. Yeah.
that's kind of more of a financial engineering thing that's
Mhm.
causes the price of our earnings per share to go up, which
Yeah.
could eventually kind of bonus
Yeah.
upper management or something like that. So there's definitely,
Right.
I think it's unique. I think you have to look at every situation. I think Apple's been a consistent buyer
Yeah.
back of shares, and to Tyler's point, I think if they don't buy back, if they buy back a little less, that's probably fine. But
Mhm.
if they basically
Yeah.
wouldn't buy back shares, people are like, what's going on? Why
Mhm.
aren't you buying back
Yeah.
shares? So
If
Yeah.
you've been so consistent, some companies are just,
Doing it on a one-off
we'll
basis.
do 300 million over the next 3 years,
Mhm.
right? And they'll pick and choose where they
Yeah.
want to do it,
Yeah.
and then maybe they don't renew that at the end.
Yeah.
And if you're not as consistent like Apple is, it might not be as
Yeah.
big of a deal. But I just think for the guys that consistently do it, it's kind of like a dividend for them,
Mhm.
and they
Mhm.
have to continue doing it at some level.
Mhm. And we mentioned Apple here now multiple times, and that's actually the king of buybacks, right? I mean, over the last what was it? Since 2012, they spent over $600 billion
that's
in
crazy. Think
buying
about
back their
that.
Is that
shares.
when Tim Cook took over? Was 2012? Do you know? Do you know when Tim Cook took
That's a good
over?
question. That's
I
got to
do not know the
be. I think
year.
that's probably slightly. Has he been probably been there 12? Yeah, it's probably slightly after.
Mhm.
Because I know he always gets the rap of being
Well,
not being the innovator
he's
like
more of an
Steve Jobs.
operational guy,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, not creating the new
yeah.
let's have it
Yeah.
And so
device.
instead of reinvesting in the business, I know they do a lot of it, but instead of doing that, Tim Cook came in and was like, "We'll make this capital allocation and just
Yeah, different
yeah,
approach. Yeah.
yeah."
But why is it? Because especially tech companies are doing that on a large scale, or at least they're known for it. Apple and the likes. Why is it especially in tech companies?
I think
I
they
mean,
just,
they have a lot of cash.
especially the
right?
bigger guys, that upper tier, they generate so much
Mhm.
cash flow, and it's like even if you want to reinvest your business, you can invest a lot of it,
Yeah.
and data centers, different things like that. But
Still
there's still
left over.
so much money
Mhm.
left over. So it's
Mhm.
like, what do we do? I mean,
Mhm.
you can obviously you can pay your employees a little bit more, and they
Mhm.
do that,
Mhm.
and they do projects are doing that. But
Mhm.
it's like they still have a lot of extra, and so you want to give it back to
Mhm.
your shareholders, people that are investing in your company. So that's why they
Yeah.
partly do it, and part of it is stuff, especially in tech. Like I said, a lot of these companies are issuing part of employees' compensations tied to
Mhm.
they're getting issued shares. So that's to reduce that flow,
Yeah.
increase in float. You need to be buying back shares,
And
otherwise it's
still
You
being
just
then
dilute-
you'd have the
just
opposite
dilute-
problem.
yeah,
You'd
Yeah.
have
dilute your
dilution, and then all of a
EPS.
sudden your EPS goes down, right? And then
Yeah.
again, for investors, then the stock becomes more expensive.
And we also saw like one of the Mag 7 companies initiated a dividend for the first time last year. And the reaction was actually not that positive, what you might think, right? Because there was all of a sudden questions. Oh, do they stop innovating now, or what is going on here? What kind of so dividends are still more looked at and kind of scrutinized, but
Yeah, I would say with tech specifically, or some of the big Mag 7 companies, people look at how are they innovating? How much are they spending on capital expenditure to continue
Mhm.
growing the company? And if all of a sudden they aren't doing that as much, or maybe they do initiate this dividend because they don't have any more good ideas, then
Mhm.
I think that's probably why you see that kind of reaction. And we also know that companies, especially on the tech side, you don't want to go away from your core business, right? So you don't want to start, if you're, let's say you're Microsoft, you don't want to start buying up
Bunch of hardware companies or something.
right, like you don't want to go away from that core. And so at some point these companies have to make that decision of, do we just give the money back to the shareholders, or do
Mhm.
we try and find something, but we don't want to find something outside of our known field?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think part of it is, again, it's your allocation decisions on your capital. So it's like if you want to pay a dividend, that probably introduces a new shareholder base, right? Someone that
Yeah.
actually is looking for a dividend.
Yeah.
So I think that's depends on where they are in the
Mhm.
growth cycle. It's like they have to have fine balance, right? Some
Mhm.
people can perceive it if you're a hyper growth guy that now you got a dividend, maybe the hyper growth stage is over. So maybe they're leaving, but then all of a sudden you have people that are interested. Oh, I always wanted to buy that stock, but they didn't pay a dividend. That's one of my mandates as a portfolio manager. Is I have to have a stock that pays a dividend. So it opens up another class of investors.
But a good case study for that would be Microsoft, because Microsoft has paid a dividend for a long, long time. Growth started to kind of slow.
Oh, for sure. After the
You know,
PC slowdown, right?
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, over the last 5-6 years, their top line grows at 20% again.
Yeah, it's because they're
Or
Azure
EPS
and the
growth at
data
20%.
center growth,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
They got away from just the PC growth,
Yes.
tracking that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
But what do you think are
it's
like?
not, sorry. So
No, no,
so bring that back. It's not always a bad thing for a company. It doesn't mean that a company can't pick up in that growth
Exactly.
cycle
Yeah.
again to
Perfect
have
point.
dividends paying.
But what do you think are the reasons that it's like continue to grow, like the share buybacks at all? Like it's not like a constant in history. It's like it just goes up. It just gets more and more. Is there a reason behind that,
Well,
or
I mean,
is that a shift in how companies are kind of managing or how they are viewing that? Like, what do you think is a general underlying cause here that this is just going up?
Well,
And
part of it, I mean, if you look at your chart, I mean, obviously, if you're listening, you can't see it, and we don't have it up, but it's up and to the right. But so is the stock market. So it'd be interesting to see what percentage of the overall market, right? Even though the buybacks themselves are absolutely getting bigger, but so is the market cap of the overall, the stock market. So that's part of it, and I just think that's different ways that people are using their capital.
And
Well, I would also say, just think of it as like inflation, right? Prices are going up, which means companies still have more cash flow, right? So if their cash flow continues to go up, even with whatever the inflation rate is, you're naturally going to have more buybacks. I would also say that, the S&P 500 has done fantastic over the last couple of years, but outside of the Mag 7 type of names, the stocks haven't done as well.
Yeah.
Right. So especially if you look at some of the value stocks, some of these guys might be saying, well, the market's trading at 22 times. Our relative valuation isn't keeping up with that. So we think our stock is undervalued. So we might as well spend our buyback allocation right now and try and keep because we feel the stock is undervalued based on the relative valuation to the stock market. I don't know.
And they do that, I mean, despite the situation that they have to pay a 1%
Yeah, it didn't
tax
seem like
basically
that
now,
didn't seem like much of a
but that
deterrent.
does
did
not
it?
really
No.
put a dent into that. But Keith, you mentioned before, like the risk a little bit, or the controversy around share buybacks surrounding the management and the CEO, right? That they are often maybe more short-term focused because
Yeah.
they are looking at their term, want to make an impact on their term. And one of the critics of buybacks say, hey, they are normally kind of in some way benefit from a higher stock price because they have shares as well, or some bonuses. And instead of investing in kind of
People,
something,
plans, process,
in
whatever it
something
is,
that
right?
kind of kind of
Longer term can accelerate their growth, right?
or whatever, they kind of buy back shares, and it kind of benefits the company short term and themselves rather than investing in the big picture. Do you think that's an issue here, or?
I think that's a valid argument, and especially if a stock's maybe at all-time highs or buying back, maybe they do have some other opportunities, whether it's new products, invest back in their people, invest in potential M&A activity. So I think it's probably a valid concern. It's balanced. I think it's company by company. If you're consistent on your message with Apple, I don't think that's an issue. If you're buying back stock when it sells off, you could be showing, strength to the market that, we have a cash balance. We think it's a great buying opportunity here. We're going to buy our own stock back. But there's other cases you do see that maybe the earnings to be flat when you X out the share buybacks. And it's like, if management's getting paid on growth on EPS, and it's maybe that's kind of gets a little bit of a.
So we have to be a little bit careful when kind of looking at companies, what is happening with share buybacks and what's the actual reason.
Yep.
Well, I feel like a lot of boards have restructured CEO pays over the last few years to be more, whether it's cash flows or EBITDA or something outside of
Mhm.
just earnings growth.
Mhm.
But I'm sure there are still companies
Yeah.
that have that benefit.
Mhm.
And so obviously CEOs and the C-suites would welcome buybacks.
Favor
and-
that. At
yeah.
least there's
Yeah.
a tilt to that and,
Yeah.
and an incentive to
Yeah.
that, which is always kind of makes the what is it called? The agent principle.
Yeah.
Kind of inequality, right, between shareholders and management who are insiders. But yeah,
Awesome.
Yep.
good discussion. Let's move on to Spaghetti Wall
Oh,
because
this
I
will be a
really
good
want
one.
to cover that today. It's about finance villains. And despite all the good people out there in finance, there are some bad boys and girls that kind of try to undermine the trust in the financial system. And there are some big stories over the last years or in history. And I want to hear from you what is your most interesting finance villain and bad boy in finance. I want to start with you, Keith, because I
Oh.
know that you are having the OG person
Yeah, I
that
hope I don't take
everyone I
Tyler's.
think knows.
Oh, boy.
Bernie Madoff.
Oh, no, I didn't take that one.
Okay, that's good. So he was the
Yeah.
original guy. I
The
mean, he
original
is
guy, yeah.
the big Ponzi scheme. Everybody's
Mhm.
heard of him. I mean, that was kind of a really punch to the face for the financial industry.
Mhm.
He was actually at one point in time, he's well respected. He impacted, I think it was over 40,000 different clients,
Mhm.
$65 billion. Basically, the old Ponzi scheme, right? He was
Yeah.
actually just making up numbers.
Yep.
The
And
plain vanilla.
just plain, right? You were basically, he was skimming
Fraud.
off the top, or
Yeah.
whoever's put money in, he
Mhm.
was taking it out. And long as his
Money
track
kept coming
record,
back in.
he's making up his track record. As long as money kept on coming
Mhm.
in, not an issue for for him and his
Mhm.
Ponzi scheme, right? Because then he showed these fake returns, and if no one was taking money out,
Mhm.
money was coming in. That supported his lifestyle, which is crazy. And if you look at his returns in the history of it, there was nothing crazy. It was like 10 to 20%, very consistent, but people wanted to be in it. He was actually the chairman of the NASDAQ, so
Nice.
so he had a very well respected job, and that's how he ended up, everybody wanted to get in his, funds
Yeah.
that he was managing. The other thing he was his own custodian. So
Yeah.
that's why you
Mhm.
always hear about that. It's like when you're writing a check, to Bernie Madoff,
Mhm.
he didn't have to put it into any third party
Yeah.
custodian, right?
There's
So
no oversight.
no
from a
checks
third
and
party
balances. So
here.
he
Yeah.
was just, I want a new yacht. Let's just yank out as long as money's coming in.
Yeah.
How it ended up, blowing apart was obviously what do you think happened? Market turned down in
Yeah.
2008, right? Market crashes. People want their money out. It's like,
Mhm.
I don't have enough money coming in to offset the money going
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
That's a problem. That's how he got
Mhm.
discovered. And it was just a disaster. I mean, it was a
Mhm.
family office. He had a couple boys that were working for him. They left in shame. And then he ended up going to prison, ended up dying in a prison. But
Mhm.
he was the OG of it. It was awful. It was a Ponzi scheme. And it took,
Mhm.
some people got their money back,
Yeah.
parts of their money back, but $65 billion. Think
That's a
about that.
lot.
That's a
That's
lot of
crazy,
money,
yeah.
and 40,000 people. I mean, you had Hollywood people. Everybody just
Mhm.
wanted to get in there because
Yeah.
his track record was so consistent.
And he was like a known figure, right? A known, respected
Yeah, as I said, he was a
finance
chairman.
figure,
It wasn't
right?
like he was just like
Not
some
some
hedge
guy
fund
from
guy
whatever,
that just
yeah.
blew off the covers on performance and money flowed into him. He was a OG guy, been around forever, and
Yeah.
and you read stuff about him. It's like he had enough money as his normal lifestyle. He certainly
Mhm.
didn't need to be doing that. So,
Yeah.
but that's my biggest
Right.
villain out there.
At what point? What is the driver? Just to keep it up because there's no
Well,
point of
have you seen the
you missed the point of
Have you seen the
return.
movie?
I haven't
on
seen
it?
no.
Oh, you should watch it. But there's a part in it where he's talking to his sons, and I
Yeah.
think it's his wife. But he says, "I just couldn't stop."
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a point of no return. It's like,
Yeah.
how do you resolve that? At some
crazy.
point, you cannot stop because it's like,
No, he's cheating people out of their money,
right,
which
because
is completely
Mhm.
terrible.
Wild. Well,
Tyler?
mine is Jordan Belfort,
Oh,
Wolf of Wall Street.
Mhm,
Ah.
mhm.
that's more your style. Anyway.
That's more my style.
style.
I mean, he was just doing pump and dump scheme, boiler
Mhm.
room type stuff.
Mhm.
You go buy the stock ahead of time, and then you start penny stocks, 5-cent stocks. I mean, and then you go and sell it to
Mhm.
this mom and dad down the road and
Mhm.
get a bunch of people into it. And then when it's at the highs, you pull your money out
Mhm.
and let them
Let
deal
them.
with it.
And there
With
was
the
nothing.
free
And there was
fall.
nothing there to deal
Yeah.
with, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's-
Mhm.
So that's
yeah.
fun.
No, that was a.
And
If you've seen the movie, that's
I
certainly
just,
interesting.
the movie is just why I chose it, just
No.
because
And that stuff, I started again, dating myself 30 years ago, that stuff was legit happening. I mean, maybe it still is today, to your point where we started our conversation, but that probably wasn't very unusual when you literally pick up the phone, dialing for dollars. There was no information when you were calling people's house, they didn't have any internet to go to and fact check any of the stuff you're telling them. Like, oh, okay, I'll buy it.
I mean, as long as you sound trustworthy, right? You kind of could pull
or you're a
something
good
off
salesman
like
too,
that.
right? Like that's the other part of it. And obviously he was, and Wolf of Wall Street, just the party animal nature of it. Just
Right. Do you want to share how he got caught?
I actually don't remember how he got caught. I mean, I know he got arrested.
Yeah,
for
he got
it.
arrested too. I assume it.
I think
eventually,
it just caught up with him. I think people started to.
Yeah, you
there's
you
reports
defraud
on-
enough people,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
then it's
And then at some point, it's one that kind of
yeah,
tipping point.
when
right?
they got quite large too.
Mhm.
So you start to get to enough size that I imagine it starts hitting the radar of SEC.
Yeah, you're driving around Ferraris and all this stuff when you were started out as
because
some
normally
low-level broker.
these people are not living under the radar, right? Normally
no.
there it's like, and I think that's part of the flashiness and why people are so stunned by finance fraud, because it's always like blows up big. It kind of always, a lot of money is involved, a lot of, I don't know, flashy houses all around the world, cars, whatever. It's like, I think, I don't know, part of the sparkle.
Who's your person?
So
or people?
I cannot keep up with you guys. I went with the plain accounting fraud. So boring. Anyways, the way I choose it is it kind of blew up in 2020. It's Wirecard. You might know it. German DAX listed company, so public listed company. And they did a lot of the money transaction behind credit cards. And we had like a card from our employer that was Wirecard in the background. And then we at some point didn't know if we get the money back from some of the employer benefits.
Company,
So it was big, and a huge company all around the world. And so one of the managers, the CEO, is in prison. So there was already the court and everything. And and that's why I chose it, because it's still ongoing, and it is, and that what we kind of discussed, the insider ring that blew up reminded me of that, because it also sounds like an action movie. One of the managers, he is Austrian. So again, we have an Austrian connection, like the cash in the bag. So I don't know what's going on here. Anyways, he was the operational, so the COO, and he led the Asian business. And anyways, why it blew up is auditors were kind of seeing some discrepancies, and $2 billion were on the balance sheet, but nowhere to be found. And there were like years and years and years were they able to hide that from auditors, from whatever. They kind of did a lot of theater and all of that to kind of being able to hide that from them, and got away with it for a while. Anyways, when that kind of came out, and the CEO got arrested, and then all of that, he fled to Russia. Nobody knows exactly, but he had ties to Russia. So he fled. He's still on the run.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Wow.
It's his name is Jan Marsalek. So he's still nowhere to be found. And where it's getting interesting here, because we hear a little bit from that still ongoing, some bits and pieces, because he's allegedly leading aspiring for Russia.
Wow, you have some interesting tales there.
Yeah, so he is allegedly leading whatever for the FSB, for the Russian whatever. And there were some Bulgarians arrested in Great Britain just over the last year that he that spied for Russia, that he was the head of this. So it's still ongoing. Nobody knows exactly what's going on and why he's a spy, and he obviously did that during his term for Wirecard already. So all of kind of twists and turns. Nobody knows still where he is. But yeah, that's
a lot of villains out there, unfortunately.
A lot of villains out there. But again, like a lot of stock went to zero. A lot of investors got I mean, that's what the end was, right? I mean, it's a lot of normal people who felt the pain because of this. But again, it's still on the run, still.
Those are fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know, it's fascinating at some point, even though
it's a good thing we have regulations, right? To make sure this stuff doesn't happen. You don't want to see
that often,
the average person losing money.
So, anyways, that was my. I mean, it was a little bit more boring than yours, but anyway, we had some.
It's not a
spy
movie
activity.
yet. Maybe it will be.
Yeah, I think it
Right,
would
like
be a
like-
good.
yeah.
I don't know. It's like you have everything in there: action, spy, money.
Sounds like you could be a consultant on the movie theater.
Yeah.
floor.
Anyways, anything else to add to your finance villains?
No, I think we
No.
covered it. I think it's another good
Yeah,
show.
yeah.
Nice job, Lisa.
I think it's good. We do not end it on a very good foot today because of all the fraud that we just discussed. Anyways, we are back with a little bit more upbeating topic next week. How about that?
Perfect.
So see you next week.